Good morning. How are you guys doing? Good. Oh, I love that. You don't always get a response when you ask a question like that. I'm going to do a little bit of timing on the phone. I'm not surfing, but I thought what we'd do is have a nice moderated conversation. I'll introduce the panelists. We'll chat about the issues, and then we certainly want to open it up to you all for questions. So please, as you're listening, think about things, jot things down, whisper to your neighbor, because we would absolutely love to have interaction from the audience as we go forward. I think that's really the whole key to making a conversation what it is. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm Courtney Collins. I work for KERA. I'm on the radio side, and I'm the lead reporter for our One Crisis Away series there at the station, which is basically a series that focuses on life on the financial edge through a social lens, kind of looking at wealth, poverty, and the economy with the social bent. And I've been working on that for about 4.5 years now. It's been a great project, and it's helped me learn a whole lot about North Texas, and hopefully situated me to have a nice led conversation about some of the issues surrounding gentrification today. So let's introduce our panelists first. To my left, we have James Armstrong. And James is a West Dallas resident, preacher, activist, and also president and CEO of Builders of Hope as of pretty recently, right? The Community Development Corporation?
Yeah, my first week.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. And next to him, we have Lisa Neergaard, who's senior policy manager at buildingcommunityWORKSHOP. You're heading up policy and community capacity building initiatives?
Yeah, that's
awesome.
correct.
Wonderful. And Monte Anderson, he's community town building activist, preservationist, environmentalist. You've chaired all kinds of local chambers of commerce, and you also are the Dallas-based developer at Options Real Estate, right? Okay, and we'll let you all talk a little bit about how your experiences inform some of your positions. But I think the very first thing we want to talk about is really, you hear the word gentrification a lot. You hear it socially, you hear it within the media. I'll let each of you kind of give me your best definition of what that means.
Yeah, so James Armstrong, let me first say you guys are amazing. When I was a college student, I was getting over a hangover on Saturday morning, so you guys are already above the curve. So to me, gentrification, I represent West Dallas, which is an area that's going through fast-paced gentrification. And, you know, for me, it's really when you have a low land value and developers come in and build development that really increases the land value to the point to where it pushes out the current residents. So that's kind of a snapshot for me. Another way is when, an area that never had a Starbucks, now you can go get a avocado toast with mocha choco loca drink, that's kind of the visible signs of it. But for me, it's really just when the land value is increased because of new development.
Lisa, do you have anything you want to add to that? Any litmus tests or kind of markers?
I think it's the time frame and the intensity to which not only the economics, the investment factor has increased in a neighborhood, but also the economic characteristics of those who live there. So when you see a neighborhood increasing in about 25% in a 2-year time, that's significant. And if you see the resident, the median income of a census tract increased by $20,000 in a 2-year time span, that's significant. Because I think every neighborhood wants investment. Every neighborhood wants, particularly those that are low socioeconomic, want, what do you call it, revitalization or reinvestment. I mean, it's had a lot of terms over the years. They all want it, but they want it in a way that honors and respects their history, that recognizes their right to stay there, and that they were there first. And so that, a gradual change lends itself better to respecting both sides of that story.
Now, Monte, I read an interview with you once where you said you've worked in the have-nots parts of the city, and do you think that's kind of positioned you to have a unique take on gentrification?
Yeah, I use the word gentrification, and that's the word that's what we should be doing, and that's what Lisa just described. When I was your age, I was racing motorcycles for a living. So over the years, living in southern Dallas County my whole life, in Oak Cliff, Duncanville, DeSoto, those are the areas I lived. Stayed there my whole life. I watched people come and go. I watched the big developers come in and destroy neighborhoods, and in fact, they're doing it to Bishop Arts right now as we speak. And what happened in Bishop Arts was two things happened. The policy caused gentrification. We changed the zoning, okay? The people, the Chamber of Commerce and the developers changed the zoning to fit them. And then they put in TIFs, so we incentivized it.
Can
with
you explain more a little bit about TIFs?
Yeah, the TIF is basically a tax incremental financing, and what it is it's a tool that developers can get basically reimbursements from cities to improve these properties. So with these incentives, so we not only changed the zoning and allowed it from a public policy standpoint, but we incentivized the gentrification. I mean, we actually caused it to happen that way. And gentrification happens quite often in areas where there's a lot of non-owner occupied buildings. So one of the things we do in gentrification is in the early days, before a place is good, and that's why I work in places like where the Belmont Hotel is one of my projects, the Texas Theater is one of my projects, but I work in places where nobody wants for a while. And what I try to do is go in and get the locals to own property. So we have wealth building and locals owners. And if the local owner is there, at least if the big developers are coming through, they'll at least get rich, by selling their property. But they won't get run off. And you hear this all the time. You hear it time and time again. And usually they're getting run off because they don't own the property. They don't have good leases. And therefore, it just comes barreling through. You won't even recognize Bishop Art. It's gone. Bishop Arts is gone as we know it right now. And you watch and see, it's just going to be uptown. And so gentrification is early, and that's why I'm working like south of the zoo and Polk and 67 and those areas, and even closer to Fair Park right now, is to get in early and get ownership. And our incentives ought to be for the locals to get ownership, okay? The incentives ought to be, and that's where the secret sauce is. That's where the X factor is. The X factor is in these little local businesses like Wingfield Hamburgers on South Beckley, places like that. And so if they can get a foothold in there early enough, then you've got a chance of slowing down gentrification, therefore gentrification.
Lisa, I want to ask you, I heard someone once, I think it was a community organizer, say that gentrification has a pretty negative connotation, I think, overall. Most people kind of associate it with something bad. But in a neighborhood that's gentrifying, if some of the original residents manage to stay there, then they will really benefit in some ways from gentrification, i.e., if the neighborhood improves and the sidewalks are better, then they get to take advantage of those. If that trickles down to the school, that's a good thing too. Is there a positive side to the coin of gentrification?
Sure. I mean, there's a positive side to investment. So I think every neighborhood that experiences a level of gentrification has a different story. When we're talking a little bit about West Dallas, the history of West Dallas includes environmental injustice. It includes a smelting plant. It includes the neighborhoods having to fight to have it declared a Superfund site so their kids wouldn't get lead poisoning. I mean, so that's the story of the neighborhood, right? And that's also shows a history of disinvestment and disinterest from local leaders. So the flip side of the coin for residents of La Bajada at this point is, yes, there's now increased investment, there's increased, there's better infrastructure, there are more jobs, most likely eventually there'll be improvements to the schools. And so do they want to, it's the question of, there's always a social side as well, particularly for when gentrification is really fast and it brings in a whole new demographic. Will they feel comfortable and welcome and want to stay is always the question. I was actually reading a story in the Dallas Morning News of a family kind of in the area around City Place that, they're longtime residents. They've been there since the 70s or 60s, and they feel good about staying. Except, the big challenge for them right now is the property taxes. So, even homeowners that want to stay sometimes, particularly in that moderate income bracket, struggle because of just the economic, improvements and requirements related to a new income. I think and I don't want to go too far, our city right now is very much, in a lot of cities, are very much a bell dynamic in regards to income. So we have a lot on the wealthy side, a lot on the lower income side, and we haven't figured out from a policy standpoint, and Monte's very right, our policies are driving a lot of this. We haven't figured out how to have quality development in an urban context that allows a middle income family. And when I say middle income, the median income for Dallas for a family of 4 is roughly around $57,000 a year. So if you can understand, that's not very high. So figuring out how they can live in the city too is a question that everyone is asking. And then if you think even further, how does a family making less than that also live in the city?
So James, talk to me a little bit about West Dallas. This has been all over the news. We did a 14-story series about it last year. Basically, for those of you not familiar, West Dallas has a long history, goes way back to the Bonnie and Clyde days. The demographics have changed. Like Lisa said, there were lead poisoning issues, environmental hazards. There's been, a lot of things that have happened in West Dallas over time, but this bridge was built several years ago, and once the bridge kind of connected downtown Dallas to West Dallas with a really straight shot, development just went like gangbusters in West Dallas. So tell me, in your view, what is the most striking the most striking difference between West Dallas now and even West Dallas just 10 years ago?
Yeah, so my family has been in West Dallas since the 50s. My family owned one of the first businesses, African-American owned businesses in West Dallas. My father told me stories about how when the environmental issues came about, that it was declared a hazardous site, one of the land properties in West Dallas, and then how the company would pay the residents to get rid of the lead. So when you talk about a community that has really been, just kind of forgotten about, and really just, West Dallas is really a result of a redlining way back at the beginning of the city. And so that area, African Americans, minorities couldn't even get a mortgage. And then on top of all of that, you had, I believe, one of the largest housing projects in the entire nation by President Roosevelt, I believe. And so West Dallas is the result of social injustice and grouping all of the poor people together and basically putting your foot on their neck and saying, we're not going to give you a mortgage, we're not going to allow you to own your property. That's the result of West Dallas. And so now that you have individuals who are interested in the area, it's really a great neighborhood. I am a champion of West Dallas. If you're looking to buy a house, come to the West. It's the best place to live, really close to all major highways, 10 minutes away from downtown. So it's a great place to live, and it's always been a great place to live. It's just the interest was not there. And Monte mentioned that development policies have really created gentrification. I would also say that the lack of protection policy has created gentrification in a high pace in West Dallas. You have these big box multifamily luxury units that are popping up everywhere. The neighbors have been arguing for a CVS for years, but it wasn't until we got a lot of the multifamily luxury apartments that the CVS came about. And so right now, the residents, the HMK situation, on top of all that, let me explain the HMK situation because I was in the middle of it. So remember, the redlining is where basically laws that are passed that prevent mortgages in certain minority areas. That's the baseline definition. So as a result, you had one of the largest slumlords. I want to say slumlord because that's who he was. That's what he was. You had 300 families being evicted in the middle of all of this gentrification. 300 families being evicted from their single family rental home. That is like gentrification or displacement on steroids. That situation has yet to end. A lot of the families left West Dallas. He now continues to own a lot of the properties. He gave an option for some to purchase their home, but the home that they purchased, it needs major repairs, and they are held liable for all of the code violations. And so it's just a really, really bad situation. It's the worst situation on the resident side, and then it's probably the fastest pace of gentrification that I've seen in the city of Dallas, really. And so it's really a balancing act of trying to, how do you stabilize the neighborhood? And we can talk about policies that would do that the city has yet to enforce or even create that would help. But you have basically the worst situation in West Dallas of environmental issue, social injustice, and high-pace gentrification.
So Monte, I want you to expand a little bit on the idea you were talking about getting people a stake in their neighborhood, helping people own property, whether it's a home or a business. We know there's a lot of income inequality in Dallas. So how does the city, or how does the community insulate itself from just chasing low-income families further and further south each time there's gentrification?
So right now, and I was in West Dallas, speaking of West Dallas, I was over there before the bridges working and cleaning up environmental waste and junkyards and with the Belmont Hotel before any of that started. And the intent was to restore, and even myself got caught up in gentrification with my development behind the Belmont because money, okay, in 2008, I needed money, and so I sold stuff to people that did stuff I didn't like. So even myself am guilty of this. But what's got to happen? Like, I found this out not too long ago. When I go borrow money today as a white male in this country, I borrow money for real estate developments at 5% interest, and I'll pay 1 point up front, 1% up front. In the African American community, and I teach incremental development around the country, so I've been in West Atlanta, which is very similar to South Dallas recently, and a gentleman there, young black man, told me, I said, what kind of loan do you get? And he said, I get the standard 314. I said, 314? I've never heard of that. What's a 314? 3% up front and 14% interest. I mean, and then he doesn't even own the property in his name. The lender, the loan shark, owns the property in his name and in their name, and then he just does the work. It's just modern slavery, okay? In Dallas, yesterday I talked to a young black man who's a developer, and he gets a 210 loan, 2% and 2% up front and 10%. What has to happen is there has to be policy and there has to be incentives for the low and middle class of getting loans in these places. It has to be low down payments. It has to be low interest. And what it is here in Dallas, it's exactly the opposite. Okay, if you're poor and you're in South Dallas, you're going to get the highest interest. You're going to get the highest points up front. You're going to get the worst deals out there. And to look at a neighborhood, and you think about Bishop Arts, or I think about downtown Duncanville where I do work also. The thing that was very good in the very beginning is all we did was replace the sidewalks and the infrastructure. No incentives to developers, no zoning change, anything. And it was beautiful what happened. All we did was replace, if you remember, any of those you remember that Oak Cliff, you remember when we put the sidewalks in, how great it got. Nothing got gentrified. In downtown Duncanville, it's the same thing. We replace the sidewalks, it's good. The infrastructure should have been going in West Dallas for sidewalks and things many years ago, and then those properties and the people would actually help themselves up. We would help the bottom up. But that's not what happens. What happens is we don't fix that stuff till the big developers come through. And so West Dallas right now is a tidal wave. You might as well have a tsunami starting at the bridge. Right now there is a tsunami going through that area. There will be no poor people left in West Dallas pretty soon. And there will be no cute little entrepreneurs left in Bishop Arts.
And we should say a lot of the new development in West Dallas, we're talking like $1,200 to $1,400 for a one-bedroom apartment. And a lot of the families that were living in the HMK homes that you referenced were spending $300 to $500 a month for a single-family home. I mean, is there a single HMK family that could afford a single apartment that's being developed?
Absolutely not. That has been the struggle. There was House Bill by Eric Johnson, House Bill 2480 introduced that would have at least stabilized. And my view and what I preached, not on Sunday, but in front of the city hall, is really that the way to stop displacement that comes from gentrification is to secure home ownership. Currently, there is no policy in place to abate property tax, to give money for rehab. That is the quickest and the cheapest way that you can stop and prevent displacement from happening in neighborhoods like West Dallas. And to solve gentrification, I look at it, it's like a toolbox. There are so many tools that have to be in place, and in order for it to work, in order for you to have this environment where you have development and where you have low-income housing. I went to San Francisco and met with Mayor Edwin Lee on behalf of the city before he passed away. And I just sat down, and if you've ever been to San Francisco, it's crazy expensive. I met someone at Starbucks. They were paying $1,000 a month to live in someone's backyard in a tent. So it's that expensive. No, by no joke, it's that expensive. I said, what happened? What happened to San Francisco? I remember there were pockets of historical African American communities. What happened? He said, James, San Francisco is the result of developers unchecked. Developers gone wild have the right to just go and build whatever they want, because when you think about it, developers are going to do what? They're going to make money. That's what developers do. These are developers that don't have the heart that Monte has. He's doing some amazing work. And so there has to be policy in place to secure current home ownership, policy in place to check developers and encourage inclusionary development, basically where they put in their buildings a percentage of affordable housing, even in the multifamily.
Lisa, talk to me about the culture change that follows gentrification. You mentioned earlier that sometimes it's not even just about the money, it's about people not feeling like they can recognize the neighborhood that they came from and that their parents lived in before them. When a neighborhood gentrifies and we have a lot of new development and higher prices, how does that change the fabric of the neighborhood?
Yeah. So the most common form of gentrification that we experience is white gentrification, for lack of a better description. It's affluent white singles or couples moving into a predominantly community of color, low-income community of color. However, there is a new term called gentrification that a researcher is kind of studying in Boyle Heights right now, which is also very interesting and kind of touches on this social dynamic. But so I always like to use the analogy of of the grandma, because everyone loves a grandma. When she can no longer go to the grocery store and recognize the foods that she always bought, or the brands that she always bought, because the grocery store that she used to go to now is, a super luxury, store that I probably go to. And she can't make this, she can't afford to buy the same loaf of bread because that loaf of bread doesn't exist anymore. She can't make the same things because everything looks different. She no longer feels comfortable and like she recognizes her own neighborhood. I was doing community engagement around parks in actually a neighborhood in Southern Dallas, sorry. And this older woman was like, I don't go to the park anymore because my neighborhood looks different. And I thought that was really interesting. She used to go every single day when her kids were younger to the park, and now her neighborhood, while still African American, looks different or feels different to her, and so now she just doesn't go out. And I think there's a sensitivity that it's not just about race, but it's about the economic, sometimes preferences or cultural preferences that comes with that. So when we wipe out, every single small business that used to be someplace, you're also wiping out people's patterns of life, where they got their food, where they bought their beer, where they went did their dry cleaning or their laundry. Those are patterns that we all rely on and make us feel comfortable and safe. And so when all those things are gone, you no longer feel that same connection to your neighborhood. And so now it's just a house that you live in.
Monte, it's kind of overwhelming when you're in uptown or downtown, the amount of construction crane and plastic sheeting up. It's enough to give you a headache. This urban core development and kind of resulting gentrification in neighborhoods that are nearby. When did this kick into such high gear? I feel like you have a good perspective on kind of the timeline of Dallas development. When did it get so bonkers, and kind of what was the driver?
Well, it got that way a long time ago. It didn't just get that way. That's why where I work, I work, many years out in front, because if you're like trying to stop it right now in West Dallas, you're too late. It's just too gone. Even in Fair Park, even in the last year, as you know, our group is one of the finalists to take over Fair Park with the city. The city's in the process of bidding that out right now. But even Fair Park is nearly too late right now. I watched the prices of properties over in Fair Park triple in the last 12 months with speculators. And so what happens first is the speculators will come in, and they'll come in, the vultures. They come in, they're always flying just like a vulture out there, looking for dead meat that they can take. And so they come in, and several years before, West Dallas, I would say that West Dallas, this happened probably 10 years ago. It happened 10 years ago. In the Bishop Arts, it happened, probably 15, 20 years ago. Really happened, and it's too late now to really get that local ownership. If you go south of the zoo right now, like where the Dallas Zoo down Ewing and Marsalis and those right now, it's already happening down there. I got down there and got a foothold in a couple of places and got local ownership. I got 2 properties local ownership right now, and they're lucky to get that. They're lucky to get, but it's got to happen because speculators, just like in anything, just like any investors. We're a capitalist country. I'm a capitalist and an environmentalist and a preservationist at the same time. So you can't trust me though because of my capitalism, and you can't trust developers, okay? Because what happens to us is the world knocks us around, even with good intentions up front. I tell you, I'm going to do something. And I tell them the Fair Park right now, I said, look, I'm going to write these covenants down. I'm going to promise you. Now you got to hold me to those, because the politics and money will knock me around, and then I'll start to slide off. So you can't trust even me. You can't. So you got to hold us accountable. You, the community, have to hold us accountable. Policy can't do it alone. The community education in the community has to be a part of that. Very early on. And it's the way this country was built. Our country was built one little building at a time with 2 units above, where the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker had a couple of units, and that's where the affordable housing, the workforce housing went. The owner of the business lived 2 blocks away and walked to work. This is what we're talking about. We're going back. I know you're talking about new urbanism this afternoon, but new urbanism is actually old, just done in a modern context. And so those are the kind of things that where our country was built. What happened to us, I don't know. Greed, extreme capitalism run amok, no social. We have more billionaires in Dallas than we have anywhere, in the world. And their billionaires are not nice most of the time. They're the worst people to partner with if you want an investor partner is a billionaire. So, but it's about having more and greed and having, the only thing you take with you from this life, I want to tell you this, the only thing you take with you is what you give away. So you can't take in, I've known very rich people, and they died, and it was just a mess and fight. You probably know them too, but people that give all that away, they take it with them.
And a quick follow-up to the well-trained eye, don't worry about that. What is the first sign that you see when something's starting to gentrify? Like that all of us would probably move right past, but how do you know that a neighborhood is going to start changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
It's really easy. Survey flags. Those little orange survey flags? Just watch for those survey flags, and you'll start seeing them pop up. The next thing after that, you'll see a real estate sign pop up that you didn't see normally. It would be, I think it's funny in Oak Cliff when we used to see these Highland Park realtors, all of a sudden their real estate signs were in Oak Cliff, and then you knew it's there. And then if you watch the pricing, you'll start to see that pricing. And everybody I see in Fair Park right now, all my brothers and sisters in that area over there, I tell them do not sell when they come through, do not sell right now. Call me. I'll give you free advice. Don't sell.
James, talk to me a bit. It sounds probably straightforward based on what we've all discussed so far today, but why is it that communities of color are so vulnerable to gentrification?
I think it's systemic in a lot of ways. I think the system is not set up for communities of color. We talk about, again, mentioning it, redlining, all of these policies that have been in place that have really kept communities of color down. And you know, I'm not the one to bring up slavery, but I would equate it to modern day slavery, when it's so hard for a minority person to rise above their situation because of the systems that are in place, the social injustices of today. And no, they may not be in chains, they may not be working in a plantation, but let me tell you what that looks like today. That looks like, you know, we have a lot of programs for communities of color, but that looks like a mother who has 3 kids, and she has to depend on the government for housing because she had 3 kids when she was 16 years old. There's a job out north, but in order to get to that job, she has to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning. The daycare doesn't open till 5. So it's those situational circumstances that really keep people where they are. And I was just talking to someone yesterday. For some people, it's easier to live in poverty than to fight your way out of poverty. For some who live in poverty, it's easier just to adjust your life and adjust your expectations to the situation that you're in than to go out there and fight every day to rise above the systems that are in place. Someone from West Dallas, like myself, went to Baylor, went to Princeton. It wasn't easy. I had to fight. Coming from a family has a history of poverty, I literally had to fight against the systems that are in place. And so to answer your question, I think there are systems in place that really keep neighborhoods like West Dallas, like South Dallas. There was a neighborhood way before all of this gentrification happened. There was a neighborhood that's probably one of the most expensive places in downtown, uptown area. It was all African American, a Freedman's Town, where St. Thomas area, that area, we called it Old North Dallas is what African Americans call it. And so these things have been in place for a long time. And so to answer that, I want to say this. We should not be deceived in thinking that 2 or 3 cute little policies are going to fix these systemic issues. We have to, as a city, and I say this all the time, we have to tackle this thing aggressively. We have to do things that no one has ever done. We have to think outside the box. We have to be innovative to rise above some of these things that have been in place for 50, 60, even 100 years.
Can I just got a quick answer on that. Here's the thing. Here's what I believe in that. And I have a lot of involvement in the black community. I mean, so as a white man, my experience goes back 300 years when my ancestors came to this country. And so I have carpenters and, you know, builders and hotel owners and people, 300 years of experience in me. And as a black man, you have 50 years of experience. So it's just like somebody else in my business. If I'm 50-something years old and I've got all this experience and you're 20 years old, you're not going to have the same knowledge, level of knowledge of that experience in our DNA. And so my job, or our job, is to reach over and help that experience so they're not paying 3% up front and 14% interest. So many of my African American friends do not even know that there's a such thing that they can get 1% and 1% up front and 5% interest. So giving that experience quickly around to a community so they know better and know not to do these bad deals, so we can bring that experience quicker. We need to put that in or like you said, an aggressive motion.
And really, just real quick, it really is like what Monte said, it's like someone having a half a mile start in a mile race, and for minorities, again, we have to really level the playing field. I don't know if that's policy. It's really, I believe, it starts with having honest conversations like this. We can talk policy all day, but policy doesn't give individuals who have been, kind of pushed away a hand up, And I'm not one to talk about, government assistance and all that, because my mother was never on government assistance. As a single mother of two, she literally worked 4 or 5 jobs to get us out of poverty. And so, but there has to be a way that we give people of color an opportunity to catch up in the development world. Real quick, I've spent most of my year in investment banking. I'm just learning at 31, I'm just learning how to be a developer. And my grandparents, my great-grandparents, they know nothing about what I'm doing now. And so you talk about that generational knowledge where you have great-grandfathers teaching fathers and grandkids the way of the world and how to. So communities are dealing with that as well. You have to put that layer on there that they just don't know. They don't know how to make a will. So when they die, their property is just out there. And they don't know sometimes how to argue their, I just learned that you can actually argue your property tax. You can go down to the office and say, hey, no, it needs to be this. I didn't know that.
You always should, right?
Yeah, I didn't know. So it's that educational things that bring these communities to have a fair chance at really succeeding and prospering in cities like Dallas.
Okay, so I think, and we'll do one more question, Lisa, and then we'll go to questions from you all, which I'm very excited about. So talk to me about the importance of community engagement. I know that BC Workshop every so often will go and just kind of have an open meeting in different communities and neighborhoods and say, please come talk to us about what's weighing on you. Why, I guess, kind of piggybacking off what Monte said about community accountability, why is it important for people who live in neighborhoods to get to talk to people who could make change for them?
Yeah, so I work for a nonprofit community design center. We started off as a nonprofit architecture firm, and now do community planning and creative placemaking. And it's a core of our practice, and I mean this in regards to both architecture and our planning and our other projects, is community engagement. Because I don't live in your community. I don't know what kind of house works best for you. You do. You are the expert in your neighborhood. You are the expert for what house design works best for you. And so and particularly historically, communities of color and low-income communities were always told what was best for them. They were told that this housing is modern and new and it will better your life. And so just the simple act of asking someone, what would you like your house to look like? Or what's your vision for your neighborhood? How should we calm your streets? Where should we put the park? Is both empowering, and it changes the narrative, and it allows that neighborhood to tell their story instead of, frankly, someone who looks like me telling that story for them, and oftentimes getting it slightly wrong. The number of times I've read about a neighborhood in the Dallas Morning News that was actually labeled the wrong neighborhood, I can't begin to tell you. And it's because someone outside the neighborhood is telling that story. And so they're getting it wrong. And so the reason why we think community engagement is so important is because that's the only way you're gonna start to turn around the systemic issues that he's talking about. It's the only way you're gonna start to so we think engagement does 2 things. One, it empowers people. It also, you begin to teach them all the skills that you've learned to do the thing that you're doing so that they can do it, the next time for themselves. Because money from a nonprofit side is always tight. Grants always end. And so if I don't leave my community stronger than when I found it, then I've done a disservice to them. If they can't replicate some of what I've done, if they can't, I do a lot of community capacity building, so I work in the valley around drainage issues. If they can't go to their council member after I've done a whole session with them to get the information around their drainage. Instead, if they're constantly relying on someone like me to do the work for them, well then I haven't given them anything. I've given them one project. I've given them one tool, like one bit of information, but they can't sustain that. And I can't financially, as a nonprofit, sustain that work in that neighborhood, in this neighborhood, and like all of the neighborhoods. Does that make sense? I feel like that's not very eloquently said, but. So anyway, the engagement is important because it shows that you're valuable, and then also, ideally, it's informing and empowering people so they can do it for themselves, and then that way, it's not always someone outside doing it for them.
Go ahead,
So
Monte.
one thing that's really important, that everything she said was exactly right, but the most important thing about community engagement is people in these local southern Dallas communities are smart. There is creative, smart people in these communities, and that's where the secret sauce is. That's where the X factor is. It's in the local culture. It's in the guy that can cook this unbelievable hamburger. It's in the guy that makes this widget. It's in those places, and we have just wiped those. In southern Dallas, we have nearly wiped that out. And that gentrification happened with loan sharks, title loans, cheap chicken joints, and that has already began many years ago, wiping out the local culture. So the gentrification started in some of those areas many, many years ago.
Okay, so I think we have time for a couple questions. So who's got one for our panelists? Do you want us to bring a mic back, or what are you thinking? Sure? Okay. Who has a question? I'll kind of come to you. You're close, so you get to go first.
Hello, my name is Alyssa. I'm a master's in public administration student at the University of North Texas. And I have a question about the low-income tax credits. I lived in Cypress Waters, part of Dallas, that new development. I was actually able to live there because they discounted that rent like 30% because I made under the limit. And just wondering if that has been a solution. One of the solutions, it certainly helped me because I was like, instead of 1,200, it was like 800. I know we were talking about the 300, 500 range, so, and I loved that because it was really rich people living right next to really poor people. I mean, that's the way it was, and I was wondering, are we trying to get that mesh when we talk about finding the middle class there, like having people live next to each other like that?
Yeah, I'll answer that because I'm the mayor's appointee to the Housing Finance Corp of the City of Dallas. So that's what we do, tax credits. The problem with tax credits, and the reason why Dallas is in trouble, is because they've put tax credit properties into these low income communities. So essentially what you're doing in this case is you're putting all the low income people in the same corner of the city. And so it has helped, but we have to be creative with these tools, right? Before the city, any developer that wanted to do something, they would just come to the city, and if it looked good, or if I had a relationship, or I went golfing with the mayor, boom, stamp of approval. We have to be strategic, and we have to be creative. I'll tell you where tax credit properties would be better strategically, is in areas that are on the cusp of areas that have like a really, really good market. So I'll say something like Highland Park, which is, you're familiar with Highland Park. Neighborhoods like along Forest Road and things like that. Tax credits will be great there because it's an area that's right on a neighboring strong market. And then you have that mixed income community. You can create that.
Cool. Who's got a question? All right, I'll come to you. I'm going to go here, and then I'll come to you next. This is great.
First, I want to thank you all, particularly the emphasis on and respect for the understanding of individuals and communities. I think so often we think about these sorts of programs as giving these people something that they don't already have, expert knowledge kind of imposing itself on communities. So it's nice to see first a recognition of like a natural knowledge of one's own. But then each of you also touched on an understanding of systemic injustice. We had examples of loans. I think there was maybe a criticism of the New Deal projects in there, but I'm wondering, what system we're talking about, and if you wouldn't mind fleshing out the content of the injustice.
So I mean, and they can jump in any time. I think it's multi-layered. So you start with, well, you can start with citizenship, you can start with slavery, you can move to redlining very quickly, which ties into financing, both for home ownership. So we do last couple of years have been doing a Dallas, State of Dallas housing report, and the first one we were really surprised, although not that surprised, but even families of color who aren't low income still have a higher likelihood of being denied for neighborhoods that are predominantly white. And so you find households of color living in functionally neighborhoods that are poorer than their median income, whereas you typically find the reverse for white households. So even on the residential side, so the financial piece, and then the housing piece where you live then dictates where you go to school, and where you go to school then dictates kind of the social capital that you have because of who you know, and then that very quickly ties into the first job you have and the first wage you make, and then that first wage then gets compounded in like your overall potential. In addition, where you live affects the healthcare you access. So all of these things, it's not one system, it's many systems that aren't really talking to each other, that aren't recognizing the inherent, or they recognize if they don't know how to solve the inherent injustice in place.
So I think like the tax credit thing we talked about before is dealing with the symptom of the problem. It's not the problem. So 100 years ago, we had less of a homeless problem than we have today, and we didn't have any of those fancy tools. What we had was people in rich neighborhoods could build a garage apartment and rent it to the person that couldn't pay as the student, or to the wait staff, or whoever it was. We had the shopkeepers with 2 units where they could rent the space to their help. So we had the workforce housing, the affordable housing was spread out all over the community, and all of those policy, zoning has wiped all of that out. So if I want to build if I'm a baker and I want to build 2 units above, they throw the book at you. I mean, what you have to do when you build like that, because that owner, that is not a big REIT, is not a big fund, is not a big capitalist, and they don't have to have the same spread. So it's a natural system. The tax credit system is an unnatural system. The giveaway of America, it's like the Amazon deal going on right now. It's like, which city's going to be the stupidest? Whoever gets that is going to be, it's got to be, it's that way. And so we're just giving away our country. We're giving it all away. Now the Chinese are financing our roads even. So, it's a way policy could be. See, I believe as an urbanist and an activist, I believe that through the built environment we can fix all these problems, and we can fix it without subsidy. In fact, we're getting ready to do the first unsubsidized homeless housing product maybe in the country right here in Bonton Farms. Getting ready to start the construction on the very first one, and that's a whole story. Yeah, Bonton Farms is in deep South Dallas. It's a Freedman area. It's probably got 90% poverty, nearly 100% poverty, 75, 80% unemployment in the area. And they started a farm down there to help the locals be able to provide just basic food for themselves. And now it's turned into actually people are making money off of it, and it's really having a great impact on the neighborhood. Still many, many problems in that neighborhood, but at least there's hope in that neighborhood. So it's probably one of the poorest neighborhoods in all the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
It's worth visiting if you haven't been down.
It is worth it. See Patrick with the collard greens. He got me to eat collard greens every morning.
He's awesome. All right, I think our next question is over there.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I was just wondering if you all could speak a little bit more about the civic engagement necessary to overcome this problem, because we've been speaking this weekend about how Dallas is really suffering from low voter turnout and low civic engagement. So how can we really rally the community to get involved?
I'll tell you, because I came back from college and I was living downtown in one of the high rises, and I was able to see West Dallas from my balcony. And one night I went out on my balcony and I was so convicted, because when I was a kid, I would look across the levee and see all of these skyscrapers and think, well, that's just another world. But now I'm on the other side looking from my ivory tower down below at my community, and really being in the place of like Nehemiah, where he said, I saw the broken down walls of Jerusalem and I wept. And that was me. So my involvement was moving from downtown to where the action was, and really moving to those neighborhoods that were, because my thought, you can talk about changing a community all you want, but until you live there, until you become part of the community, until you can rally the neighborhood as a neighbor, you really can't, you can make changes, but you really can't you're doing yourself an injustice. So what I tell individuals is move to these communities and become an active voice.
Okay, I think we have time for probably one or two. One of you all up front. Perfect. In the black jacket.
Okay. So I have several questions. Oh my God, it's so loud. So the first one is how is the property being assessed? Like, how is commercial property being assessed by the appraisal district in Dallas?
It's by the market value. I mean, that's being assessed by, like if commercial property is assessed the same way as residential. It's the same tax rate. It's just the assessed value that you're going. See, the cities always trick you in saying they're not raising taxes. They're just erasing assessed values. So the assessed values are based on market conditions. So if one of these vultures comes in, right, that I talked about a minute ago, and buys a property for 50 cents, the next one buys it for 75 cents, the county is picking up that higher sell, and then they're assessing those properties at that higher sell price.
Okay. Is there too many like investors trying to invest in historical homes, potentially to renovate and bring in low-income families? So I'm asking.
Too many investors. There's too many real estate flippers and too many shows on TV for sure out there.
Well,
I mean,
in
there's
Dallas.
too many. I mean, everybody and their brothers in that business, flipping and there's not enough people, in my opinion, doing historical renovation and honoring the neighborhood. It's got to take people in the neighborhood, like they were talking about, to do that. It's got to take somebody with a deeper interest in the neighborhood than just the developer from North Dallas coming over to try to save us in South Dallas.
I think it's not just about the number of investors. The challenge, at least, so I live in Oak Cliff, and so one of the challenges and I recently became a homeowner, I was battling with investors, and yet someone coming in with a loan is not, to a home buyer, is not as appetizing, if you will, as an investor who's going to pay cash. And so that's the problem that is currently happening in our moderately priced neighborhoods, is that someone that could afford, what used to be normal, which was $150,000, can't buy it because they're battling with investors who will pay cash. And now the average home price that we're seeing is $350,000. So that is a very large jump in a very short time, which is compounding this issue around particularly affordable home ownership. So it's not just the fact that there are too many of them, it's how they're actually purchasing homes and the ability for a non-investor to be able to compete with them. And there's no disincentive on the policy side. So in Vermont, they have an investor tax. So if you flip a house within a year or even a year and a half, the time frame, there's a tax on that because they recognize that you made this isn't a normal, I sold my house and I made money on it. This is a business. And so they actually tax it like a business. There's nothing like that in Texas.
It's a good tax.
I know, right?
So one final question. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name's Tristeza Ramirez, and I go to school at Texas Wesleyan University. And my question, I'm not a homeowner, but my husband and I have been talking about using our VA home loan. And I know that you all mentioned the 314 and 210 loans that sometimes individuals get trapped into. And do you think that there are veterans using their VA home loan that might be getting discouraged from using that and getting trapped into something like this? Because I recently asked a lot of veterans, is this something that, or what are you all seeing? Are you all being told to just use a regular loan? Are they being upfront about what things you can use or your VA loan, home loan for? Do you think that there's a lot of issues with that, and how that would play into the whole gentrification of some of these communities? Because a lot of veterans tend to be more in like the middle class.
I can just, I mean, there's not enough in this community. Whoever asked about community advocate, and then, I mean, there needs to be a constant education and constant, you know, there should be microsurgery clinics all over the city in these areas where you can go in and it's like a design studio. It's like what you were talking earlier. We were talking about these little centers where you can go in, the community can come in and talk about what they want their community to look like, talk about what kind of opportunities there are for loans, talk about things you shouldn't do, talk about, you know, education things. And I would like them to be around a little grocery store or a little coffee shop. So if you wanted to start microsurgery in a little place, and like Bonton Farms, you'd have the little farm there, you'd have the little coffee shop, and what they do every morning at Bonton is people come down the street and they sit around a big table and they talk about stuff. Now down there, they're not talking about financing. Down there, they're talking about just how to stay sober one more day, you know, at this point. But eventually, that would get to a higher level. But there is a lot of bad things happen to people with loans and things like that. There's a lot of really bad things. There's a lot of people that buy houses that they'll get what they call a contract for deed, which means you don't really get the title to the house. You don't get the title to the house till you pay it off. And if the guy that sold it to you, okay, gets a tax lien on him, and you've been paying this all these years, the taxing authorities come take it and you lose the place because you didn't own the house. And so they're not getting full advantage of things like you're talking about. They're not knowledgeable of maybe other resources and things that they could get, and therefore they're making really bad decisions that many people lose their homes that way, don't really even have their homes.